very much, Elaine. Welcome to the Maynooth University Library SaroWiwa Poetry Evening. This event marks the 25th anniversary of the execution of Saro-Wiwa and his 8 colleagues, the Ogoni 9. Unfortunately, somebody who's very central to this story, Sister Chiyamaki, can't be with us tonight, but she's in our thoughts and sends us her best wishes, as does Dr. Owusu from Nigeria. The event is being recorded and it will be available in the library YouTube channel. And we also would like to take a photograph for our social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So Elaine will take a photograph now and perhaps at the end. So if you wouldn't mind switching on your camera, if you have a camera, she'll take a photograph now.
Saro-Wiwa was a prominent Nigerian writer and activist. He was from Ogoni, which is in the River State area of the Niger Delta in Nigeria. He was concerned about the environmental destruction of his homeland by the activities of Royal Dutch Shell, and he organized peaceful protests and set up a movement called Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, MOSUP. In Nigeria, he met Sister Chiyamaki, who worked there for 30 years, and she helped him promote the cause of the Ogoni. And later, on her return to Ireland, she campaigned very actively to save the life of Saro-Wiwa and his 8 colleagues, the Ogoni 9. Sadly, they weren't successful, and on the 10th of November 1995, Saro-Wiwa and his 8 colleagues were executed. So tonight we're marking the 25th anniversary of that event. In 2011, Sister Chiyamaki donated the death row correspondence she received from Saro-Wiwa to Maynooth University Library.
Thank you so much for that, Helen. And it's so lovely to see so many people here, both familiar faces and new. And I'd just like to say that it's been a real pleasure for me to be involved with the evolution of this competition and to learn more about Saro-Wiwa as a person and an activist. And it's particularly meaningful to me to learn about the history and the legacy of this activism that ties together Ireland and Nigeria, and in a way that, you know, you look into the archive and you can see the passion and the life in this activism, and it's so easy to forget those connections. And I think now of all times, we really need to cherish them. So I'm delighted to have gotten to know Sister Chiyamaki. I've been delighted to get to know this archive and this legacy a little bit, but I've also been really delighted to see the entries come in to the poetry competition from Irish writers and writers from Nigeria and writers from further afield, and to be able to be involved in the grouping of those pieces together has just been a lovely thing, because so many different dialogues and ideas are emerging that we might not otherwise have got to experience and hear. So I'm really, really delighted that you're all here with me this evening. And what I'd love to do now is just to start introducing the poets, talking a little bit about them and asking them to read their poems that were either the shortlisted or winning poems in the competition. So what I'd like to ask you all to do is to keep yourselves muted for the moment, because as you might be able to hear, my toddler is being taken up the stairs and having a slight tantrum in the background. So in order to avoid background noise, I might ask you all to keep yourselves muted, and I will remind you to unmute when your name is called. We hope everybody on the lineup is here, and if you're not and I don't see you, or I don't, you know, when I call your name, or some people have arrived a bit later, we might come back at the end and just check. So try not to worry too much if you missed your cue. We'll get to everybody, and as Helen said, we'll have some questions at the end, and I think in the middle we'll go back to Helen for a minute, and she's going to read one of Sister Chiyamaki poems too. So the first person I'd like to welcome is Eilish Fisher, who was the second prize winner in this year's Saro-Wiwa poetry competition. Eilish grew up on a farm in rural Vermont and moved to Ireland in 1998. Her poetry has been published in magazines and literary journals, most recently in the anthology Writing Home, published by Daedalus Press in autumn 2019. Her first children's novel, set in the mountains and valleys of County Wicklow, was shortlisted for the Dyslexia Children's Novel Award. She has a master's degree in early medieval Irish history and literature and a doctorate in medieval English literature from Maynooth University. And she took second place with her wonderful poem, Night Feedings, this year. So Eilish, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Jessica. And I would just like to quickly say thank you so much to yourself and to Helen and Elaine and everyone at Maynooth University Library. And also just how delighted and honoured I am to be a part of this. So thank you so much. I'll start reading. Can you hear me okay? Is everything? Our internet in Glenmalure is not great, so I just want to check. Night feedings. For the children separated from their parents at the US-Mexican border, detained in custody and neglected, 2018 to present. I hear you call into the night's fluorescence, a cage unable to stifle the sound that travels around the world to this bedside radio. I move in maternal mindfulness towards a source, my child's cries puffing like smoke through muted cot bars. I lift him while your sobs cling and sway. I stir like tendrils of seaweed in these waves, a pulling of you to me. I would hold you all if I could, rock you into stony caverns of peaceful sleep and quiet listenings. You would hear the tick-tock of the clock on the wall, rustle of soft-pawed foxes in the woods, the purring as night's dark harnesses the bee-balm moon. These days, the numbing salve is washed away as we rock and cry and ache into the long nights waiting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Absolutely beautiful. And I think so many of us at the moment are able to admit a little ray of hope around that situation this week. So here's hoping that it's something that will be sorted out really soon, because I think it's just such a devastating situation. And I think we're also amazed that this is happening now. So thank you for capturing it so beautifully with your words. I'd like to move on to our second reader now, who's the wonderful Barbara Flood. Barbara is a writer and journalist with a special interest in migration and refugee stories. She has a podcast, short talks, and several radio documentaries broadcast on News Talk and community stations. She won the Fish Memoir competition in 2019, has pieces published in the Cormorant and Hinterland magazines, and is currently working on a video poem series, In This Together, with a photographer in Moria refugee camp. So Barbara, welcome.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks, Helen and Eilish. That was a beautiful poem. Yeah, it's great to see everyone's faces as well. You're the first people I've seen all day. I've been at the house all day, so it's great. Anyway, this is called The Disappearing, and I wrote this after being on Jessica's workshop. You know, I got the idea during the workshop and then worked on it, so that was great. The Disappearing. Yul Brenner's bald head is on the wall opposite, an advert for used cars. You'll never beat our offers. You take a drag on your cigarette, the slight dawn light unflattering, a green tint to the windowsill. George Wasuf is playing low on your phone and you're suddenly reminded of the street you used to live on. Maybe they'll rebuild it someday, I say. You tut, not like our tuts, but the Arabic tut, which means no. Will they rebuild my neighbours from their graves, you say?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Barbara. And again, just bringing us to a totally different place, but I think again to a dynamic that is familiar to so many people all over the world, and beautifully captured. And I love that Yul Brenner's in there too. Thank you so much. Our next reader is the wonderful David Butler, who's a multi-award-winning novelist, poet, short story writer and playwright. His third novel, City of Dis from New Ireland, was shortlisted for the Kerry Group Irish Novel of the Year in 2015. His second poetry collection, All the Barbaric Glass, was published in 2017 by Diver Press. Ireland House is to bring out his second short story collection, Fugitive, in 2020. Literary prizes for poetry include the Mariah Edgeworth, Féile Filiochta, Ted McNulty, Brendan Kennelly, Bailey Burra and Poetry Ireland Trócaire Awards. So welcome, David.
Thanks very much, Jessica, and thanks to Helen as well. Hi everyone here.
Got a little bit of a
it's one of a,
going on there, David.
Yeah, there's a little problem with my speaker at the moment. It seems to have a little high whistle.
Yes.
So thanks for that.
Yeah. Try turning it down a tiny bit, she says, being tech diagnostic person.
It tends to disappear after a few minutes. I was hoping it would be gone by now, but
Great stuff.
yeah, that any better?
I think so. We'll give it a shot anyway. Thanks, David.
It's an environmental poem. Hopefully it's one of the things that will slowly begin to improve now that a certain man is going to be in the White House. It's entitled Tlaloc. Tired of burnings, bulldozers, charred lungs, Tlaloc the rain god decamps from Mayan rainforests, rise the boat of trade winds, comes to reign over the old world. Days on end, the swollen earth has swallowed till it's soaked as blotting paper. The sun is an aspirin dissolving in a gauze of soaked cotton. Storm drains clog. Rivers turn reptilian. Shed their alluvial taint in basements. Swell to bursting. Silver plate the floodplains. Tlaloc moves over the face of the waters. Looks on desolation wrought by a man. Calls up the other weather gods. Okay, thank you very much, Jessica. Sorry about the whine.
Thanks so much for that, David. I think it actually added to the apocalyptic air of the poem in a really effective way, you know. But it's fabulous. That's such wonderful imagery, and again, just that sense of great elemental things moving in a way that we're going to have to understand sooner rather than later, I think. Thanks so much for that, David. Helen, I'm going to hand back over to you now, and I think you're going to read one of Sister Majella's pieces to us.
Sister Majella can't be with us this evening, so I'm honoured to read a poem she has written, and it's included in the new book, I Am a Man of Peace, Writings Inspired by the Maynooth University Ken Saro-Wiwa collection. And Majella read this poem last year at our seminar in Maynooth on the 10th of November. And she told us that it was inspired by the events of the night that Saro-Wiwa and his colleagues died. She was in Ireland and she was with people who were protesting at the Nigerian embassy. And they renamed a street in that area, Ken Saro-Wiwa Avenue, at that night, just to identify with what was happening. And she later wrote this poem. A night of death, 10/11/1995. Large sobs of rain, gusts of pain, flowed along the lane of Ken Saro-Wiwa Park. Umbrella shroud unrolled to cradle your precious name. I brought you home, given you a space, a place to be mourned, until freed to your own. You were waked in Ireland on a street of shame, renamed and washed with Ireland's rain. Thank you.
Gorgeous. Thank you for sharing that, Helen. I think it really, really captures that deep connection that Majella forged, and that you can really see reflected in their writings back and forth, and in the poems that he sent her, which we used as lovely prompts for some of the workshops, especially with the secondary school students, and they responded really well to those too. Thanks so much for that, Helen. And our next reader now will be Glen Wilson. who is a multi-award-winning poet from Portadown. He's won the Seamus Heaney Award for New Writing in 2017, the Jonathan Swift Creative Writing Award in 2018, and the Trim Poetry Competition in 2019. His poetry collection and experience on the tongue is out now with Dira Press. So welcome, Glen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Helen and Elaine, and everyone at Maynooth. It's great to be here, and hello, everyone. It's great to see other faces other than the postman who runs away. So I'm going to do a poem. It's a lamentation of swans. It's a similar idea to the idea of the Parliament of Owls and a murder of crows. So apparently there's just a whole list of these that I've been trying to work my way through. So this is the only one that's really worked at the moment, but I'm going to read it for you now. A lamentation of swans. Their song is life in the making, necks curved under pressure. In reflection they make a heart, but we ripple it away with the steel crumbs that breach the surface, with what we don't need and what they didn't ask for. They've been chased from the fens of history, given pawns, and then we vilify the females for rumours of apocryphal arms broken. The males blamed for the lusts of gods are those who style themselves as such, all based on the accepted lies of nights so far removed. It is their untamed ignorance we envy, for it can't be earned. For we learn as Leda did, those in power take what they can never have. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Glen. And again, it's so lovely in these poems to see the ecological side of the activism of Ken Saro-Wiwa so beautifully reflected or picked up upon and teased out. Because I think those are two things that are really wonderfully intertwined in his work, but also I think in Irish people's concerns for and connection with the landscape. So thank you for that, Glen. It's a really, really beautiful piece. Next, I'm going to introduce Paul McCarrick, who I hope has been able to join us, but I'll give the introduction, and if Paul's not here, I can pop back to him later. Paul's work has been published in Poetry Ireland Review, The Stinging Fly, The Ogham Stone, and elsewhere. He was selected for the Poetry Ireland Introduction Series in 2019 and received an Artist Bursary grant from Westmeath Arts Office. He's currently living in the Midlands in Ireland and is completing his first collection. And Paul, if you're here, will you join us to read your piece? Now, I think we may not have Paul, which we suspected earlier, but I just thought it would be nicer to give the introduction anyway, and hopefully Paul might join us a little bit later to share his beautiful work with us. So I will move on next to Philomena Obasi, who works in social care and adult and community education. She facilitates adult and youth groups addressing the changing trends of Irish education, which embraces diversity and interculturalism. She works with children and youth from different countries through leadership and mentoring programs, and is currently a volunteer as an administrator of a youth group. Philomena is an occasional lecturer with Maynooth University and lives with her family in Kildare. Her interests include reading, writing, music and culture, and I've had the pleasure of meeting her at previous Ken Saro-Wiwa events, so it's wonderful to have you here tonight. Philomena, will you read your poem for us, please?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, and hello everybody. Nice to be in this space this evening. I'm really delighted, and I just want to say this poem is dedicated to my family, the Abulus, my children, Timothy and Christine Obasi, and my first Irish family friend in Ireland, Martin Rowan and Breda Curl. They are even sponsors to my children during their confirmation. Hello, Martin and Breda. Nice to meet you here. Okay, the title of my poem is Smell of the Fish. Smell of the fish. Sleeping, so calm. Arising, so sluggish. Aches and pains on tongue, raffia mats. moonlight, cricket sounds, fish smoke, kinsmen in circles, grandma smoking fish, few but many mouths, sharing, fighting, community together, our bare natural existence, all for one and one for all.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Philomena. Just transports us to a place and time so immediately. Gorgeous and beautifully performed as well. Thank you. So next up, I'd love to introduce Caroline Bracken, whose work has been published in the Irish Times, the Fish Anthology, Sonder Magazine, the Ogham Stone, and the forthcoming Best New British and Irish Poets. She was selected for the Poetry Ireland Introduction Series in 2018 and has been sponsored by Culture Ireland to read her work in the USA. She recently won the Poetry Day Ireland 2020 and DLR Creative Ireland Poetry Competitions. One of her poems features on the Poetry Jukebox. So welcome, Caroline.
Hi Jessica, hi everyone, and thanks to Maynooth University and all involved. This poem is called The Prisoner in memory of Ken Saro-Wiwa, and I wrote it after taking part in Jessica's writing workshop. The Prisoner. Give it up for the prison guard who breaks ranks to bring me forbidden rations, a piece of bread or cake, a mango to sweeten my day. Give it up for the prison guard who whispers news from my 8 brothers, soon to be martyrs, but who would rather be just fathers. Give it up for the prison guard who smuggles letters in a bread basket, crumpled missives from my wife, son, or sister. Give it up for the prison guard who prays for my soul before it goes and memorizes my words to pass on. Give it up for the prison guard who unlocks my leg irons and rubs into my wounds a mother-made poultice. Thank you.
Gorgeous. Thank you so much for that, Caroline. And I remember reading that poem for the competition and just thinking it captures so many of the details that I've taken from my experience of the Ken Saro-Wiwa archive, and it just really brings us to that place again. Thank you so much for that. So our next reader is Chiyamaki Enya Ahmedi, who is a writer, performer, arts facilitator, and literary editor. Her work was published in Poetry International 25, Poetry Ireland Review 129, Imma Magazine, Architecture Ireland, the Irish Times, Writing Home, the New Irish Poets, and co-edited by Chiyamaki and Pat Boren, and The Art of the Glimpse, Sinead Gleason's recent collection of 100 Irish short stories. Her work has also been featured on RTE's poetry programme. So welcome, Chiyamaki.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jessica. I hope you can all hear me.
Yeah, great.
It's fantastic to be amongst such brilliant voices and such insightful researchers, artists, documentary makers, academics tonight. It's great to see some of their faces as well, as we've all expressed. There is loneliness in our solitude at the moment, and hopefully it will not be much prolonged. I'm going to read a short section from my poem entitled The Misrecognition of Bodies as Thorns in 4 parts. So I'll be reading part 1. What does it mean to love your neighbor as you love yourself? When your beauty is stolen from your skin, your hair, and the name your mother gave you when she took you from the wet hands of the midwife. Pale as you were then, your eyes were still darker than the color of some baked mud after the rainy season. and she knitted her Africa into your name, tighter than the way God knitted it into your jungle hair and safari skin. And now, you cannot look yourself in the eye. You write yourself love notes in Morse code. Each indent is a question. Why faces with skin the color of burnt caramel or coal never grace the crystal ball? Why love is a word said only with your back to the mirror? And why there is so much sting in the silent bleed at the end of each question? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Chiyamaki. It's such a beautiful piece, and it really captures the way that pain and trauma and movement and migration can be so embodied, which I think is something that we don't recognize enough. So thank you so much for sharing your beautiful words with us. Our next reader is Nora Najarian, who's an award-winning poet and writer from Cyprus. She's had poetry and short fiction published internationally, and her work was included in A River of Stories, an anthology of tales and poems from across the Commonwealth, Best European Fiction, 2011 from Dalkey Archive Press, Being Human from Blood Axe Books, Capitals from Bloomsbury, and most recently Europa 2 from Comma Press. Her latest book is the collection of short stories, Selfie, from Roman Books. So welcome, Nora.
Thank you, Jessica. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
Yes. So good evening from Cyprus, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be taking part in this. And I'd like to share my poem, Cassandra Speaks, with everyone. Cassandra Speaks. As a child, I was always inventing damage. I braided snakes into my hair, let their tongues lick my neck and ears. They poured cold venom, made my hearing mad. My fingernails scratched the air, trying to catch the birds falling from nowhere. I plucked their feathers and buried their bodies in the back garden. I've foreseen and seen the truth. I did not mean it, I say, my whole life. I tear snakes' tongues from their roots, count mutilated birds. The scene repeats itself day after day, and every night I dream of falling. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Nora. I'm such a fan of the whole idea of the Cassandra myth. And I think that, again, you've just interpreted it there so beautifully for us. And in a way that I think speaks of women's experience in war across the globe. And the constants of that experience, which is wonderful. Thank you so much. And our final reader tonight is Lind Grant Oyeye, who is our winner of the Ken Saro-Wiwa poetry competition this year. And again, I'm not sure whether, I think Lind was going to be joining us a little bit later, but again, I'll read the introduction, and if she hasn't managed to catch us yet, we might go back to Helen for a few questions and comments. So introducing Lind Grant Oyeye. Lind was born in the Niger Delta and now lives in Kilkenny. She's passionate about highlighting social justice and mental health issues through the arts. When she is not writing, she is engaged in advocacy for mental health services for young people. She is the recipient of various poetry awards and has work published in literary magazines, anthologies, and curated poetry projects around the world. And she took first place in this year's Ken Saro-Wiwa poetry competition with her poem African Refugee. So Lind, are you with us yet? No, I don't think she's managed to join us yet, unfortunately. So I might pop back to Helen now and we can have a little bit of discussion.
Thank you very much to all our readers. I'm now going to throw this open to the floor. So if you'd like to make a comment, it could be to one of the poets or to Jessica, or if you want to ask a question, please unmute and speak. Thank you.
Michael?
Hello, Helen. Congratulations on putting this on in the midst of all the difficulties And I just wanted to ask Jessica and also Philomena, because they come from very different backgrounds, in a time of such uncertainty and everything being so unclear, how do you actually find a focus to write? Jessica, from the point of view of somebody who teaches creative writing, and Philomena, because in her own life, she has come through so many changes and faced so many challenges.
Well, I might throw that over to you, Philomena, first, because I'm actually really dying to hear your answer. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael Kenny, for that very interesting question. First of all, I find the time to do this because I'm just trying to create a safe space for myself, a space to maintain my mental health, you know, a space to sit down and look at the world from another angle. It's like we've all been on this side of the fence. We've been there so comfortable. Now we've been juggled around. Some of us fell back into the other side of the fence we've not even been, we're not familiar with. And we're just so confused. So in that sense, I looked at how things were before, you know. I just took myself back to Ogoni land and put myself there and said, this was how things were before. We're comfortable. We were okay with everything. We were sleeping on the floor. It wasn't bad. It was so unpolluted that we could even hear the sound of the crickets. You know, the cricket sounds in the night. There's no sound pollution. There's no air pollution, nothing. We're living as a family before things started coming in, civilization, you know, investors. And that was what polluted the world. Like the oil company that was placed in Ogoni land, you know, that polluted their natural bare existence. What are they? They're fishermen, they're farmers. So spillage of oil on the water caused so much confusion for them that the fish that was so much around, that the things that were so common around became extinct. We started fighting for them. We started grabbing and looking for how to get them. And as families, we're divided. But then we were all for one before and one for all. But with this uncertainty, we had to survive. We had to fight each other. So I looked at things that way and I used it, you know, just to create something out of it, to write that poem out. Thank you.
And that's a hard answer to follow, and I suppose really in response to Philomena's answer as well. I mean, I think one of the things I've tried to remind myself during the lockdown is that I have the luxury of writing, and the luxury of focusing on creativity. You know, and we find ourselves in a very strange position at the moment, where most of us are actually, and thankfully in Ireland, coming to terms with a loss of personal freedom for the first time. And that's difficult, and it's been really hard, and it's been harder for some people than others, in terms of people who are vulnerable or isolated. And I found myself very frustrated at the beginning of lockdown with people reminding me on social media that Shakespeare wrote however many plays during the plague years. And I wanted to drop kick Shakespeare for a while. But I found myself now with this second lockdown feeling a bit more philosophical and a bit more adjusted. And a lot of that has been to do with the fact that I've been very engaged with the plight of people in direct provision for the last couple of years, and especially over the lockdown, because I think it's been hardest on people in that kind of setting and situation, and a lot of us in Ireland have been very, very worried and very unhappy with how things have been handled in direct provision, particularly during the lockdown. And for me, I've kind of used it as an opportunity to gain some kind of insight into what that loss of personal freedom might do to a person. And we have the very soft end of the wedge here. But I've been trying to kind of stay engaged with a little bit of activism on that front, and just pressuring people in government to keep the notion of direct provision in mind. And then also I have just been sitting myself down and giving myself a pep talk and saying, you know, you have the luxury of being able to sit and write and pursue your ideas. So a little bit of mindfulness along those lines has gotten me a lot further than scrolling through social media and looking at the wonderful bestsellers in the making that everybody else seems to be writing. So, you know, it's a funny time, it's a hard time, but a little bit of kind of external focus on the rest of the world and the things we can try and change in small ways, even when stuck at home, has been helpful to me. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
I have a question, and I wonder, would any of the poets or Jessica like to comment on this? When we had our workshops, our poetry writing workshops with Jessica in May and June, there was a tremendous uptake. And I just wonder, are more people writing poetry and engaging with poetry because of the circumstances we find ourselves in now?
I find that it's almost been an up and down existence in terms of the writing, because in one way I've got so much more time to write, whereas before I might have had to carve out time to sort of think, right, I want to focus on this. But at the same time, I've found a lot of the sort of things that you take for granted as inspiration, sort of going out and seeing friends and going places, you know, the things that would spark off ideas aren't always there. So sometimes I was feeling, at some points, I was in a bit of a rut, writing very depressing things that weren't really going anywhere. But at the same time, I had a lot of time where I can maybe think through some of the things that weren't very obvious, if that makes sense. I think it's like Jessica said about the soft end of the wedge. You know, our freedom's restricted is not as bad as a lot of people in the world are gonna be having it right now. But I think mentally, I think a lot of people need to get their thoughts out of their head, and I think poetry is such a good vehicle for doing that. Whether it makes any sense to anyone else doesn't really matter. I think just the act of getting something on a page is therapeutic enough, and going back and looking and editing at a later date, you might unearth something that you could use later on. That's how I found it, really, though, but it's been up and down. But
thank you for that, Glen. Anybody else want to make a comment?
Barbara was going to say something there.
Yeah, Barbara.
I was just going to unmute it. Yeah, I agree with Glen. It's you have much more time, but you're not. It's almost like you have too much time that's not structured enough, or you like before you'd kind of go, okay, I squeeze in a quick hour here, or a quick half an hour. It's like when the kids were smaller, you'd be like trying to squeeze in, and so it would focus you, and so now it's harder to get focused. But one thing I found useful, apart from online workshops like Jessica's, and I do, there's a writers group, we just meet once a month on a Friday morning, kind of a Zoom thing. But also there's this thing in England, and it's a free resource, anyone can sign up. It's called Writers HQ, I think. So it's a free online retreat that you just send them a message and they put you on a thing, and you meet up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then you write, you turn off your social media, you turn off everything, and then you just write until 4 o'clock and then you go back in and you say whether you got your word count on or how you did. And I just find obviously, like, you can cheat and you can go on Facebook if you want, but I find you don't. Like, it's a way of being held accountable, and it's just really nice as well to meet a load of people like this, even just and get inspired, and then go off and do your writing, and then come back and then see how everyone else got on, and just having some kind of connection with actual humans. is just kind of important. So I would really recommend that. I can try and find the link for it on my other laptop and see if I can put it in. There was also another thing called the London Salon, which is another same kind of idea. They do it every morning from, I think it's 8 to 9, and then they do it at lunchtime. And again, you can sign up with them. They do a pep talk, they do a Zoom thing, and then you just go and you write for just that hour, and then you come back and compare. And it's just those two things I found kind of useful. So I'll try and find them on the other laptop and send them in the box thing.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Wonderful. And then Ailish, did you want to say something as well?
I just want to, I just noticed in the chats, I just want to speak for the people who maybe aren't finding the time in this lockdown situation, people with small children or who have caring responsibilities as well, that there's no shame in admitting you don't have the time in the lockdown, and to not feel guilty for not being able to find that either. That we all have been dealing with this in our own ways, and we all have our own responsibilities that come up with this, and where there might be 10 poets or 10 writers who are getting tons done and have the time, there are equally that many who might not even have a second to do it. So, you know, basically, don't feel bad.
No, and I would agree. And I think one of the things that really struck me at the beginning, and one of the things that I found most, you know, and I was joking about drop kicking Shakespeare, but one of the things that the first lockdown really brought home to me was just how competitive the nature of our day-to-day lives have become. And I think sometimes we might look at American society and see it very, you know, in particular, and say, okay, it's this kind of dog-eat-dog world and nobody takes any holidays and it's all work, work, work. And I think we in Ireland and the UK often think that we're different to that. But then social media, immediately after the lockdown, there was this sense that everybody was either running a festival or, you know, starting up some new initiative, and there was this sense of, okay, now we have time and we have to achieve and achieve. But really what it was we have to compete and compete, and we cannot have this time of withdrawal from the rat race, you know. And as somebody, you know, for me, for the first 3 months of the lockdown, I was full-time caring for my 2.5-year-old at the time. So at that time, I had absolutely no time to write. But it was that sense of kind of competition that I found really distressing at the very beginning. The thought that I was somehow failing because I hadn't written the great novel, the great lockdown novel, which, as somebody really aptly pointed out to me recently, nobody's going to want to read about this lockdown afterwards because we've all been through it. It's not an experience that anybody needs a new insight into. We've all been in the same boat, you know, and it's the last thing any of us will want to read. So I think we can all take a break, read a book, watch some Netflix, and feel okay about it. I think there's another question here from Michael Kenny in the chat as well about how do we know how Ken Saro-Wiwa found time in all his activism and his uncertainty. Helen, do you want to comment?
Well, Ken Saro-Wiwa was a well-established writer. It was his profession, and before he got involved in activism, he would have been at the University of Ibadan as a student, where he contributed to the university magazine. He studied English, and he wrote short stories, plays, and he also did a television series, which was Basi and Company was the name of it, and it was a bit like Coronation Street, massively popular in Nigeria. And of course, he wrote documents like the Ogoni Bill of Rights and wrote about the events in Ogoni. So he was a very established writer. And while he was in prison, he used that time to write. So, for example, one of his books, A Month and a Day, is an account of a month and a day in prison. And he seems to have very much integrated writing into his life.
And his daughter, Nu, is a wonderful writer as well, isn't she? I've read her book, Adventures in Trans Wonderland, which is a wonderful, I mean, for me, it was just a fascinating glimpse of contemporary Nigeria, which again, you know, there's such a connection now between the Nigerian community in Ireland and Irish people. And I always think it's sad when that understanding can only go one way. So I was so delighted to have the chance to read her writing alongside some of Ken's.
No, Saro-Wiwa came to Maynooth University a couple of years ago to read from her award-winning travel book, Looking for Transwonderland. And a number of the people who are here tonight were actually at that reading. And you can, if you missed that evening, you can watch the reading in the library YouTube channel. Now, I see in our chat box, there's a comment from Samuel, who is a PhD student here doing work on Ogoni. And he's put up a link to a petition to exonerate Ken Saro-Wiwa.
Yeah, hello?
Hello, Samuel.
Yeah.
Can you hear you?
Yeah, first of all, let me just thank all of you who have shared your ideas. I think it's nice on this special day for the Ogoni to hear all the voices, the positive voices, and then your contributions to promoting the Ogoni struggle. In addition, you know, one thing MOSOP wants to do, MOSOP is the, you know, is the movement that Ken Saro-Wiwa founded. Helen talked about that. MOSOP wants the Nigerian government to take Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni 8 off the list of convicted murderers in the country. So they've been fighting to get this done, and they're still fighting. It hasn't actually worked out for MOSOP. So the petition is about that.
Oh, I think Breda has her hand up. Breda, did you want to say something?
Just for Chiyamaki and for Philomena, my favorite Ken Saro-Wiwa book is the one which he wrote in Pidgin. Like, as writers, would either of you choose to write in Pidgin? Like, I enjoyed it because it's, you know, it's very like Creole, which we knew from Sierra Leone. But yeah, like, why did he choose to do that, do you think? And is it a medium that you would use?
Yes, Martin, that's a medium I would love to write in, because it's now becoming, I think we're getting a dictionary in Pidgin English. It's a language like we just coined in Nigeria, because when the British came in, we couldn't understand them through their accents and through the grammar. So we kind of captured some of the things, you know, they were saying, and we made it our own language. And Pidgin is so peculiar to Nigeria. Like, they have the Creole in Sierra Leone, and they have some other Pidgin languages in other parts of West Africa, like Ghana. Ghana's Pidgin is almost similar to Nigerian Pidgin, you know? So I would love to write in that language in a way to promote the Pidgin English, you know? I would love to write a book in that, because I've been teaching some of my friends the language, and when I speak it, some of them kind of get the idea. Like, sometimes I tell them, I no go fit come your house today. I'll say, what does that mean? They would know there's house, there's today. So they say, it's something about house and today. Are you coming to my house today? And I say, no, I no go fit come your house today. Means I don't think I'll be able to visit you today, to come to your house today, you know? So I think it's a language that's coming into the world now, and we're making a lot of research on it, and we're picking up a dictionary on it. So I'd love to write something on that. Thank you for telling me about that.
The book that Martin was referring to is Soza Boy, and this was written in Pidgin English. It's about the Biafran War, the Nigerian Civil War. Chiyamaki, do you want to come in and say anything about the question on writing in Pidgin?
Thank you for that question, Martin. It's very interesting. I think I would have quite perhaps a different experience, and knowledge or sort of fluency in Pidgin English as I would with French or Irish, as in I understand it, but I wouldn't be a natural speaker because we never spoke it in my home, though our neighbors and people around us would speak it. My father is a bibliophile and a lover of the English language, and at school we had very strict Queen's English instructions. So I think it would certainly be an affectation if I were to speak it. I might throw in some flourishes of Pidgin English, depending on if it suited the character in whatever text, poem, story I was writing. So if it was natural to the character, I would, but I wouldn't say it was natural to me. So I wouldn't write a large body of text in Pidgin English, but it's very interesting to hear when people who are fluent in Pidgin English speak it. It's a very delicious and rambunctious dialect, and I would love to read that book by Ken Saro-Wiwa just to see what a large body of text written in Pidgin English looks like. Thank you for the question.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to put a question to my colleague from Maynooth University, David Reinhardt, who's with us here tonight. David worked as an editorial assistant on the book with me, A Man of Peace, Writings Inspired by the Maynooth University Ken Saro-Wiwa collection, and he focused on the poetry side of the collection. David, would you like to say something about the poems or the experience of doing this? Would you like to share that with us this evening?
So just to give you a little background on myself, I studied migrant aid organizations in Tucson, Arizona, along the US-Mexico border. So there were a couple pieces there that really stuck out to me and resonated with me, especially about the children being separated from their parents. And in general, just seeing in the work the way we all interpret the global north, treating the global south, global capitalism, and the climate emergency that we're all facing. It's very potent in the pieces. And being able to communicate with these, with the poets and seeing their work resonating, the same feeling that we're all feeling was really powerful for me. So it was a really incredible experience.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, David. And I want to pick up on something Jessica mentioned earlier about direct provision. Jessica, in fact, is the editor with Stephen Ray of an anthology called Correspondences. And it's an anthology that calls for an end to direct provision, and it's a very wonderful book. And Jessica read from it earlier in the year at the launch of the University of Sanctuary here at Maynooth University. And that's been a tremendous development here for us. We now have 3 students under the scheme. 1 is a postgrad and we have 2 undergraduates. We're now going to go back to Jessica Traynor. And has her final poet arrived yet?
I don't think Lind has managed to join us, just scrolling through the attendees. Unfortunately, Lind hasn't managed to join us, but I would love to read her poem just to finish things off tonight, because it is such a beautiful piece. And I think it might just be a nice way to finish things off. But I'd just like to thank you all again for being here, for the really stimulating discussion, for the beautiful poems, and to Elaine and all working behind the scenes to make everything run smoothly. And I will just read the winning poem of this year's Ken Saro-Wiwa Poetry Competition, African Refugee by Lind Grant Oyeye. Brother, do you feel the frost in this village square, the way it makes our dance stop? It's not just because the electricity is gone or that the sun forgot it remains a star. We stopped. Oh, brother, are your fingers cold too, the way everything else is? The moon gravitates towards us in its nightly romance feel, after summer decided to die on us. Steady, slow, then suddenly puff, the way damn fool buses on Lagos Street puff for breath. Sister, do you remember that man who lost his kaftan while searching for his father's lost shirt and his mother's jewels bestowed upon her by her ancestors? How he searches. Oh, brother, the bulrushes on our path now pretend to be carnations after they have been stripped of spring colours, and the climate remains frosty in its heat as everything changes. Oh, sister, who is my brother? Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along tonight.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And we were delighted that Lind was able to join us a little later and we recorded her poem.
African refugee. Brother, do you feel the frost in this village square, the way it makes our dance stop? It's not just because the electricity is gone or that the sun forgot it remains a star we stopped. Oh, brother, are your fingers cold too, the way everything else is? The moon gravitates towards in its nightly romance feel after summer decided to die on us. Steady, slow, then suddenly puff, the way downfall buses on Lagos streets puff for breath. Sister, do you remember that man who lost his kaftan while searching for his father's lost shirt? And his mother's jewel was bestowed upon her by her ancestors. How he searches. Oh, brother, the bulrushes on our part now pretend to be carnations after they've been stripped of spring colors, and the climate remains frosty in its heat as everything changes. Oh, sister, who is my brother? Thank you.